Sometimes life changes quietly, not with a loud moment or a dramatic event, but with a simple knock on the door. For Daniel Harris, that knock would change everything. 2 years earlier, Daniel's life had completely fallen apart. His wife, Megan, had died suddenly after a short illness, leaving him alone with their 6-year-old daughter, Lily. Overnight, Daniel went from being a husband and partner to being a single father trying to hold everything together. The first year after Megan's death was the hardest time of his life. There were days Daniel barely slept. Nights were even worse. Lily would sometimes wake up crying, asking where her mom was. Daniel never knew the right words to say. All he could do was hug her and promise that everything would be okay. Even when he wasn't sure it would be. Eventually, Daniel realized something had to change. The old house they lived in carried too many painful memories. Every room reminded him of Megan. So he made a difficult decision. He packed their belongings, rented a small truck, and moved with Lily to a quiet suburban neighborhood about 30 minutes away. The new house wasn't big, but it was peaceful. A small white house with a little front porch, a fenced backyard, and tall maple trees lining the street. The kind of neighborhood where kids rode bicycles in the afternoon and neighbors waved when they walked their dogs. For the first time in a long time, Daniel felt like maybe life could slowly start again. Moving day was exhausting. Boxes were everywhere. Lily carried her favorite teddy bear while Daniel unloaded furniture from the truck. "Daddy," Lily said while looking around the yard. "Is this our new home?" Daniel smiled, even though his back hurt and sweat ran down his face. "Yeah," he said softly. "This is our new start." Lily spun happily in the grass. "I like it." Daniel laughed quietly. That moment alone made the move worth it. Later that afternoon, Lily was playing in the backyard with a bright red rubber ball when it bounced too high and flew over the wooden fence into the neighbor's yard. "Uh-oh," Lily whispered. Daniel walked over and peeked over the fence. That's when he saw her for the first time. Their neighbor. A woman in her early 30s stood in the garden holding the red ball. She wore simple jeans and a light sweater, and her dark hair was tied loosely behind her head. She looked up when she noticed Daniel. Their eyes met. Then she smiled gently. "You must be the new neighbors," she said. Her voice was calm and warm. Daniel nodded. "Sorry about that. My daughter's ball." The woman stepped closer to the fence and tossed the ball back over. "No problem." Then she looked down at Lily. "And you must be the famous Lily." Lily blinked in surprise. "How did you know my name?" The woman laughed softly. "I heard your dad calling you earlier." Lily seemed satisfied with that answer. "Thank you," she said happily. The woman nodded. "My name is Emily. Emily Carter." Daniel shook her hand politely over the fence. "Daniel Harris." For a moment, there was a comfortable silence between them. Then Emily spoke again. "If you ever need anything, just knock. I live next door." Daniel appreciated the kindness. "Thanks. We're still figuring things out." Emily smiled again. "Moving is always chaotic." Then she waved and returned to her garden. The interaction lasted less than 2 minutes. But something about it stayed in Daniel's mind. Over the next few days, Daniel noticed Emily's schedule was unusual. Sometimes she left early in the morning wearing medical scrubs. Other nights she returned home very late, looking exhausted. A week later, Daniel finally learned why. He was checking the mailbox when Emily pulled into her driveway after work. She stepped out of her car wearing a white coat with a hospital badge clipped to it. "Long day?" Daniel asked. Emily laughed tiredly. "You have no idea." Then she pointed to the badge. "I'm a gynecologist at St. Mary's Medical Center." Daniel nodded respectfully. "That explains the crazy hours." Emily leaned against the car for a moment, clearly drained. "Women don't schedule babies during office hours." Daniel chuckled. That small joke started a pattern. Over the next few weeks, the two neighbors began talking more often. Sometimes it was just quick conversations in the driveway. Sometimes Lily ran over to show Emily her drawings from school. Emily always listened patiently, smiling at every crayon masterpiece like it was priceless artwork. Daniel noticed something about her. Despite her long work hours, she was always kind. But he also noticed something else. Sometimes Emily looked worried. Not tired. Worried. A few evenings Daniel saw her standing in her kitchen window staring down at her phone with a serious expression. Once he even saw her quickly lock her door and turn off the lights when a car drove slowly down the street. Daniel thought about asking if everything was okay. But they were still just neighbors. He didn't want to pry into her life. Then one night, something happened that made that decision impossible. It was nearly midnight. Daniel had just finished cleaning the kitchen and was about to go to bed when a sudden knock echoed through the house. 3 sharp knocks. Daniel frowned. No one ever visited this late. He walked to the door and opened it slowly. Standing outside was Emily. But something was terribly wrong. Her face was pale. Her breathing was uneven. And her eyes were filled with fear. "Emily?" Daniel asked. "Are you okay?" She glanced nervously over her shoulder toward the dark street before looking back at him. "Daniel," she whispered. "I need to tell you something." Her voice trembled. "Something I can't tell anyone else." Daniel felt a strange chill run down his spine. Whatever she was about to say, it wasn't small. He stepped aside and opened the door wider. "Come in." Emily walked inside quickly. Daniel closed the door behind her. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. Finally, Emily looked up at him and said the words that would pull Daniel into a situation far more dangerous than he ever imagined. "Daniel," she said quietly, "a few weeks ago, something happened at the hospital. And now I think someone very dangerous is looking for me." The room suddenly felt much colder. And Daniel had the uneasy feeling that the peaceful life he had just started was about to change forever. Life has a strange way of bringing people together when they need each other the most. After the night Emily showed up at Daniel's door looking terrified, things didn't return to normal, but they also didn't fall apart. Instead, something unexpected began to grow between them. Trust. The next morning, Daniel woke up early and walked into the kitchen to make breakfast for Lily before school. Sunlight streamed through the small kitchen window, and for a moment everything felt peaceful again. But then he remembered Emily's face from the night before. The fear in her eyes. Daniel poured coffee into a mug and stared quietly at the steam rising from it. Whatever Emily had wanted to tell him the night before, it had clearly been serious. But after she stepped inside his house, she had suddenly stopped talking. She'd taken a deep breath, shaken her head, and said she just needed a few minutes to calm down. After sitting for a while, she apologized and went back home. She never explained the secret she had mentioned. Daniel had wanted to ask more questions, but something about her expression told him she wasn't ready to talk yet. "Daddy." Lily's voice interrupted his thoughts. She ran into the kitchen with messy hair and sleepy eyes. "Is it pancake day?" Daniel laughed softly. "It can be pancake day." Lily cheered. Moments like that reminded Daniel why he kept pushing forward every day. After breakfast, Daniel walked Lily to the school bus stop at the end of the street. The neighborhood was quiet and calm, just like every other morning. But Daniel noticed something unusual. Emily's car was still parked in her driveway. Normally she left for the hospital before sunrise. That meant she probably hadn't slept much. Later that afternoon, Daniel was fixing a loose board on the backyard fence when he heard the gate open. Emily stepped into the yard. She looked a little better than the night before, but her eyes still showed signs of exhaustion. "Hey," she said quietly. Daniel wiped his hands on a cloth. "Hey." For a moment neither of them spoke. Finally Emily sighed. "I'm sorry about last night." Daniel shook his head. "You don't have to apologize." She looked down at the grass. "I shouldn't have come over like that." Daniel leaned against the fence. "If something's bothering you, you don't have to deal with it alone." Emily looked at him for a long moment. Something in her expression softened. "Thank you," she said quietly. Just then Lily ran into the yard with a bright smile. "Emily." She held up a piece of paper. "Look what I made at school." Emily knelt down as Lily proudly showed her a colorful crayon drawing of 3 stick figures holding hands. "That's beautiful," Emily said warmly. "Who are these people?" Lily pointed proudly. "That's me. That's Daddy. Then she pointed to the third figure. And that's you. Emily blinked in surprise. Me? Lily nodded happily. Because you're our neighbor friend. Emily laughed softly. But Daniel noticed something else. Her eyes had suddenly become shiny with emotion. She quickly blinked and smiled again. Well, she said gently, I'm honored. From that day on, Emily slowly became part of their routine. Some evenings she stopped by after work with small treats from the bakery near the hospital. Sometimes Daniel invited her to join them for dinner if she came home early enough. At first Emily hesitated. But Lily made it impossible for her to say no. One evening, Emily arrived with a box of chocolate chip cookies. Peace offering, she said. For interrupting your night the other day. Daniel laughed. You didn't interrupt anything. They sat together on the small porch while Lily played in the yard. The sun slowly dipped below the trees, casting warm golden light across the neighborhood. For the first time since moving there, Daniel felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Comfort. Emily seemed to feel it too. She leaned back in her chair and sighed. You have a peaceful life here. Daniel looked toward Lily playing with her ball. It took a while to get here. Emily nodded slowly. I can imagine. After a moment she spoke again. You're a good father, Daniel. He shrugged. I'm just doing my best. Emily shook her head. No, you're doing more than that. There was a quiet sincerity in her voice that made Daniel feel unexpectedly proud. But as the evening grew darker, Daniel noticed that worried look returned to her face. Emily kept glancing down at her phone. At one point the screen lit up, and her expression immediately changed. Fear. Real fear. Is everything okay? Daniel asked. Emily quickly locked the screen. Yeah. But her voice wasn't convincing. Daniel didn't push. Still, he couldn't ignore what he was seeing. Over the next few days the strange behavior continued. One night Daniel saw a dark car slowly drive past Emily's house, twice. Another evening he noticed Emily quickly closing her curtains when she noticed a stranger walking down the street. Something was definitely wrong. Daniel just didn't know what. Then, 3 nights later, it happened again. Another knock on his door. This time it was earlier in the evening. Daniel opened the door to find Emily standing there again. But tonight, she looked determined. Not panicked. I think I'm ready to tell you what's going on, she said quietly. Daniel stepped aside to let her in. They sat at the kitchen table. For a moment Emily just stared at her hands. Then she took a deep breath. You remember I told you something happened at the hospital? Daniel nodded. Emily looked up. The truth is, I helped someone escape. Daniel frowned slightly. Escape from what? Emily swallowed slowly. From a man who has enough power to destroy anyone who stands in his way. The room fell silent. Daniel felt his heart begin to beat faster. Because suddenly, Emily's fear made perfect sense. And he realized something else. Whatever trouble she was in, it was far bigger than either of them had imagined. Before Emily could continue, Lily's voice echoed from the living room. Daddy, can Emily stay for dinner? Daniel and Emily looked at each other. Despite everything happening around them, they both laughed softly. Because somehow, in the middle of danger and secrets, this small house had become the safest place either of them had. But neither of them knew that the truth Emily was about to reveal would soon put all 3 of their lives in danger. And the people looking for her were already much closer than they realized. Sometimes the truth is far more dangerous than a lie. Daniel sat across from Emily at the kitchen table, watching her carefully. The room was quiet except for the faint ticking of the wall clock and Lily humming softly in the living room while coloring in her notebook. Emily kept her hands folded together tightly, like she was trying to stop them from shaking. Daniel could see the struggle on her face. Whatever she was about to say, it wasn't easy. Finally, she took a slow breath and looked up. Daniel, she said quietly, what I'm about to tell you. I've never told anyone outside the hospital. Daniel leaned back slightly, giving her space. You can trust me, he said calmly. Emily nodded, but the fear in her eyes didn't disappear. A month ago, she began, A young woman came into the hospital late at night. Daniel listened carefully. She was pregnant, Emily continued. She was barely 20 years old. She looked terrified. Emily paused for a moment as if replaying the memory in her mind. She wasn't there for a normal checkup. She kept asking if anyone else could hear us talking. Daniel frowned. That sounds serious. Emily nodded slowly. It was. She continued speaking quietly. She told me her boyfriend had forced her to keep the pregnancy. She didn't want the baby, but she was too afraid to leave him. Daniel's jaw tightened. That's awful. Emily lowered her voice even more. But that wasn't the worst part. Daniel leaned forward slightly. What do you mean? Emily hesitated. Then she said something that made Daniel's stomach drop. That man isn't just her boyfriend. Who is he? Daniel asked. Emily looked him directly in the eyes. He's one of the most powerful businessmen in the city. Daniel felt a sudden tension fill the room. And he's not known for being a good person. Emily explained that the man had a long history of controlling relationships and intimidating people who crossed him. But no one ever reports him, she said quietly. Because everyone is afraid. Daniel shook his head. That's unbelievable. Emily nodded. I thought the same thing at first. She took another breath before continuing. A week after that first visit, the girl came back to the hospital alone. Daniel could hear the emotion in Emily's voice now. She was crying, Emily said softly. She told me she couldn't live like that anymore. She said if she stayed with him, she would lose her life, or her freedom. Daniel looked toward the living room where Lily was still drawing quietly. The thought of someone living in fear like that made his chest tighten. So what did you do? He asked. Emily hesitated again. Then she answered. I helped her. Daniel blinked. You helped her how? Emily leaned closer, lowering her voice. I helped her disappear. The words hung in the air like a heavy storm cloud. Daniel stared at her. Disappear? Emily nodded slowly. I contacted a friend who works with a women's protection organization. They arranged a safe place for her in another state. Daniel felt a mix of shock and admiration. That was incredibly brave. Emily shook her head. It was also incredibly dangerous. Daniel realized where the story was heading. That man found out. Emily's silence confirmed it. A chill ran down Daniel's spine. How? He asked quietly. Emily rubbed her temples as if the memory gave her a headache. He came to the hospital 2 weeks later, she said. He demanded to see her medical records. Daniel's expression hardened. I told him I couldn't release private patient information. Emily's voice trembled slightly. He smiled at me, but it wasn't a friendly smile. Daniel felt the tension building in his chest. What did he say? Emily swallowed slowly. He said people who interfere in other people's lives sometimes regret it. Daniel sat there quietly for a moment. That's a threat. Emily nodded. Yes. The room felt colder again. But that's not the worst part, Emily added softly. Daniel looked at her. What could be worse than that? Emily's eyes filled with worry again. Yesterday, someone followed me home from work. Daniel straightened immediately. Are you serious? Emily nodded. A black SUV. Daniel remembered something suddenly. A car like that drove down our street a few nights ago. Emily looked up quickly. You saw it? Yeah, Daniel said. It drove past twice. Emily closed her eyes for a moment. That's exactly what they did to me. Daniel leaned forward. So why haven't you gone to the police? Emily gave a small, sad laugh. That man donates millions of dollars to the city. He has connections everywhere. Daniel didn't like the sound of that. So you think he's trying to scare you? Emily looked directly at him again. I think he's trying to find proof that I helped her escape. Silence filled the kitchen again. From the living room, Lily's voice suddenly called out happily. Daddy, look at my picture. Daniel stood up and walked into the living room. Lily held up a colorful drawing proudly. 3 stick figures again. Daniel, Lily, and Emily. Do you like it? She asked. Daniel smiled softly. I love it. But when he looked back toward the kitchen, He saw Emily watching them quietly. And her expression wasn't just worried anymore. It was something deeper. Fear. Real fear. Daniel walked back to the table. Emily, he said firmly, you're not dealing with this alone. She shook her head. You shouldn't get involved. Daniel crossed his arms. You're our neighbor. Lily trusts you. That makes you family. Emily looked surprised by the word. Family. Before she could respond, headlights suddenly flashed through the front window. Both of them turned toward the door. A dark vehicle slowly rolled past the house. Daniel felt his stomach tighten. Was that? Emily nodded slowly. That's the car. The vehicle slowed for a moment. Then continued down the street. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. Daniel finally exhaled. Well, he said quietly. I guess the peaceful neighborhood just got a lot less peaceful. Emily looked at him with worried eyes. You don't understand, Daniel. He met her gaze. Then explain it to me. Emily whispered the words that made his blood run cold. That man doesn't just scare people. Sometimes, people who cross him disappear. Daniel glanced again toward the living room where Lily was still happily coloring. And in that moment he realized something terrifying. Helping Emily might put him in danger. But doing nothing might put her life at risk. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to like the video, comment below, and subscribe to the channel for daily news stories. And in the comments, make sure you tell me honestly, how intense is the story getting for you right now? Fear has a strange way of turning an ordinary night into something unforgettable. After the dark SUV slowly passed Daniel's house, the peaceful feeling of the neighborhood disappeared completely. Emily sat quietly at the kitchen table, staring toward the window like she expected the car to come back at any moment. Daniel walked over and closed the curtains. Maybe it's nothing, he said, trying to sound calm. But deep down, he knew that wasn't true. Emily shook her head slowly. It's not nothing. Her voice was barely above a whisper. They're watching. Daniel crossed his arms and leaned against the counter, thinking carefully. He wasn't the type of person who enjoyed conflict, but he also wasn't the kind of man who would stand by while someone threatened his family, or someone who had become important to them. And Emily had become important. Over the past few weeks she had slowly become part of their small world. Lily trusted her. And Daniel cared about her more than he had expected. The thought of someone intimidating her like this made his stomach twist with anger. From the living room, Lily suddenly laughed at something on television, completely unaware of the danger growing around them. Daniel looked toward the hallway. He needed to keep things calm for her. Emily noticed his expression. You should take Lily somewhere else for a few days, she said softly. Daniel looked back at her. And leave you here alone? Emily lowered her eyes. It's safer. Daniel shook his head immediately. No. She looked surprised. Daniel. No, he repeated firmly. You did the right thing. You helped someone who needed help. Emily sighed. That doesn't change the fact that I may have put you and Lily in danger. Daniel leaned forward slightly. You didn't put us in danger. The person threatening you did. Emily didn't respond. For a moment the room went quiet again. Then suddenly, headlights flashed across the living room walls. Daniel's body instantly tensed. Another car. He moved carefully toward the window and slightly opened the curtain. His heart dropped. 2 black vehicles had stopped in front of Emily's house. And 3 men were stepping out. Daniel quickly closed the curtain. They're here, he said quietly. Emily's face went pale. I knew it. Outside, one of the men walked toward Emily's front door. Another stayed near the cars. The third slowly looked around the street. Like a predator scanning for witnesses. Daniel turned back toward Emily. Do you have a back exit? Emily nodded quickly. Yes, through the kitchen. Daniel thought fast. You should leave. Emily grabbed his arm. No. Why not? Daniel asked. Because if they see me running, it will only make things worse. Before Daniel could respond. Bang. A loud knock echoed through the quiet street. Then another. Bang. Bang. A deep voice called out from outside. Dr. Carter. Daniel and Emily froze. "We just want to talk." The voice sounded calm, but there was something threatening hidden underneath it. Emily whispered nervously, "That's one of his security men." Daniel clenched his jaw. Another knock shook the door. Bang. "Doctor, we know you're home." Daniel looked at Emily. "Call the police." Emily quickly grabbed her phone and dialed. Her hands trembled slightly as she spoke quietly to the dispatcher. Outside, the knocking grew louder. Bang, bang, bang. The man's voice became colder. "Dr. Carter, we don't want to damage your door." Daniel's heart was racing now. He walked toward the living room just as Lily peeked around the hallway corner. "Daddy." Her small voice was filled with confusion. "What's that noise?" Daniel knelt down quickly. "Hey sweetheart," he said gently. "It's nothing. Some people are knocking on the neighbor's door." Lily frowned. "That sounds scary." Daniel smiled softly. "It's okay. Why don't you go back and finish your drawing?" Lily hesitated, then nodded. "Okay." She disappeared back into the living room. Daniel stood again. He turned to Emily. "How long until the police arrive?" Emily looked at the phone screen. "They said a few minutes." Another loud bang hit the door outside. This time, it sounded like someone kicking it. "Doctor," the man shouted. "You can't hide forever." Daniel's anger finally boiled over. He walked toward the door. Emily grabbed his arm quickly. "What are you doing?" "I'm talking to them." "Daniel, no." But Daniel gently pulled his arm free. "They need to understand something." Emily looked terrified. "You don't know who these people are." Daniel looked at her seriously. "I know exactly what they are." He opened the front door. The cool night air rushed inside. 3 men stood on the sidewalk. All wearing dark jackets. All watching him carefully. One of them stepped forward. "Where's Dr. Carter?" Daniel crossed his arms. "You're knocking on the wrong house." The man studied Daniel's face. "Is that right?" Daniel didn't flinch. "Yeah." The man smiled slightly. "But it wasn't friendly. We know she's here." Daniel kept his voice calm. "Well, she's not." The man stepped closer. His tone became threatening. "Listen carefully. This doesn't concern you." Daniel took one step forward as well. "It concerns me if you're banging on my neighbor's door at midnight." For a moment the street went completely silent. The second man near the car spoke quietly. "Boss said not to cause a scene." The first man looked annoyed. But before he could respond, sirens suddenly echoed in the distance. Police sirens. Loud. Getting closer. The men immediately looked toward the end of the street. Red and blue lights appeared around the corner. The first man glared at Daniel. "This isn't over." Then all 3 quickly walked back to the cars. Within seconds the vehicles sped away. Daniel stood there watching them disappear. Moments later, 2 police cars pulled up in front of the house. Officers stepped out and approached. "Sir, did someone call about a disturbance?" Daniel nodded. "Yes." Behind him, Emily stepped outside slowly. Her shoulders finally relaxed. For the first time that night, she looked like she could breathe again. The officers took notes while Daniel explained what happened. But Emily knew something important. This confrontation wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. Because people like that powerful man didn't give up easily. But tonight, something had changed. For the first time since this nightmare started, Emily realized she wasn't alone anymore. Daniel stood beside her. And inside the house, Lily was still happily coloring her picture of the 3 of them holding hands. A strange little family. Standing together. Even when danger knocked on the door. Some nights change everything. But sometimes, the real change happens in the quiet days that follow. After the confrontation outside Daniel's house, the entire neighborhood felt different. Police patrols passed through the street more often, and the once peaceful road now carried a quiet tension. Emily barely slept that night. Every sound outside made her heart race. But the one thing that gave her strength was knowing she wasn't alone anymore. Daniel had stood up to those men without hesitation. He didn't know the full power of the man behind them, but he still refused to back down. The next morning sunlight filled Daniel's kitchen as Lily happily ate cereal at the table. To her, the night before had simply been a strange noise outside. Nothing more. And Daniel wanted to keep it that way. Children deserved peace. Emily sat quietly across from them holding a cup of coffee. She looked exhausted, but there was something else in her eyes now. Relief. "Thank you," she said softly. Daniel looked up. "For what?" Emily smiled faintly. "For not letting them scare me into silence." Daniel shrugged. "You saved someone's life. That's not something you should ever apologize for." Emily lowered her gaze for a moment. "But I might have put yours and Lily's life in danger." Daniel shook his head. "No." He looked toward Lily. "Bad people are responsible for their own choices." Emily studied him carefully. For weeks she had tried to carry the weight of the situation alone. She believed protecting others meant isolating herself. But Daniel saw things differently. And somehow that made her feel stronger. 3 days later something unexpected happened. Emily received a call from the hospital. At first she assumed it was another shift request. But the voice on the phone sounded serious. "Dr. Carter," the hospital administrator said, "the police need to speak with you." Emily's stomach tightened. Within an hour she sat in a small meeting room with 2 detectives. Daniel waited in the hallway with Lily, who was busy drawing in her notebook again. The same 3 stick figures. Daniel. And Emily. Inside the room, the detective placed a folder on the table. "Dr. Carter," he said calmly, "we've been investigating the man you mentioned." Emily held her breath. "And?" she asked quietly. The detective opened the folder. "There are multiple reports against him now." Emily looked confused. "What kind of reports?" "Women coming forward," the detective explained. "Several of them." Emily felt a wave of disbelief. 4 years, no one had dared speak against that man. The detective continued. "It seems the young woman you helped escape contacted authorities from her new location." Emily's eyes widened. "She's safe." The detective nodded. "She's safe. And she's ready to testify." Emily felt tears forming in her eyes. But the biggest surprise was still coming. The detective leaned forward. "She also provided evidence." "Evidence?" Emily repeated. "Yes," he said. "Messages. Photos. Financial records." Emily slowly realized what this meant. The powerful man who had terrified so many people was finally being exposed. Within a week the news spread across the city. The businessman was arrested during a federal investigation involving abuse, coercion, and several illegal activities. For the first time in years, the man who thought he was untouchable was facing real consequences. When Emily heard the news, she sat quietly on Daniel's porch. The evening sun painted the sky orange and gold. Daniel handed her a cup of coffee. "Well," he said with a small smile, "looks like the nightmare is finally over." Emily nodded slowly. "I still can't believe it." Daniel leaned against the railing. "Sometimes all it takes is one person to stand up." Emily looked at him. "Actually, it took 2. At that moment Lily ran into the yard chasing a butterfly. She suddenly stopped and ran toward them excitedly. "Emily. Daddy. Look." She held up a new drawing. This one was different. 3 stick figures again. But this time they stood in front of a small house with a big sun above it. "Who's this?" Emily asked gently. Lily pointed proudly. "That's Daddy." Then she pointed to the second figure. "That's you." Finally she pointed to the small figure holding both their hands. "And that's me." Daniel chuckled. "That looks like a happy family." Lily nodded seriously. "Because we are." Emily blinked in surprise. "Family," she repeated softly. Lily smiled. "Of course." Then she ran off again to chase the butterfly. Emily looked at Daniel. Neither of them spoke for a moment. But something had changed. The fear that once filled the space between them had disappeared. In its place was something warmer. Something hopeful. Daniel finally broke the silence. "You know," he said, "Lily has a point." Emily raised an eyebrow. "Oh really?" Daniel smiled slightly. You've been part of our lives for a while now. Emily looked down at her coffee. I didn't plan any of this. Daniel nodded. Neither did I. Then he said something that made Emily's heart beat faster. But I'm glad it happened. Emily looked up at him. The evening light reflected in her eyes. For the first time since they met, there was no fear in her expression. Only warmth. And maybe something more. Daniel spoke again, gently. How about dinner tomorrow night? Emily tilted her head playfully. Is that a neighbor invitation, or a date? Daniel smiled. I was hoping for a date. Emily laughed softly. I think I'd like that. Inside the yard, Lily cheered loudly. Yay. Family dinner. Daniel and Emily both laughed. Because somehow, the little girl had understood something before they did. Life had brought them together through fear, danger, and courage. But what they found in the end was something even more powerful. A second chance. Not just at safety, but at happiness. And sometimes, the people who save others are the ones who end up saving each other. If you enjoyed this full story, don't forget to like the video, comment below, and subscribe to the channel for daily news stories. And make sure to tell me in the comments, how did you like this story from 1 to 10?